are you guys? Well, good. It is an honor to be up here to teach you guys today. I'm not a preacher, so I'm a teacher, and so that could be good or bad for you. But as a teacher, I like to teach things that give you the best bang for your buck. And so the book of Revelation is one of those books that people don't understand. And so if you can give out just a few key, which we're going to do. We're not just going to do a few, so don't get crazy. But if, there are a few interpretive keys that you can give people that will open up the book of Revelation to where you understand, pretty much what's going on. And just for the record, we can pretty much understand what the book of Revelation is about. We can understand pretty much what all the symbols mean and things like that. So in other words, as we go through it, hopefully this will open you up to kind of the way the first, hearers of the book of Revelation saw the book. And so if I can help you to understand the book of Revelation at all, then that would be, I've done my job. And I think part of that is that we often hear strange interpretations of the book of Revelation where people try to they want to interpret the book of Revelation as though it's only about future things that happen, or suddenly today the book of Revelation means something, but it hasn't meant anything over the last 2,000 years. Well, that's ridiculous because it was written 2,000 years ago to people who lived and worshipped, and that book was written to them in their language, and so we would want to understand it the way they understood it. All right, so that's why I chose to title this, Reading Revelation Through Ancient Eyes, Discovering the Book's Original Message of Hope and Perseverance, because ultimately, if you want to know, if you say, hey, what's the book of Revelation about? And you can go through and we can talk about symbols, and the dragon means this, and the two beasts are this, and we'll do all that when we get through, or when we go through. But ultimately, it's about hope and perseverance through times of persecution. And so that's a timeless message that people from all time periods need to hear. And so as we go through, I think you'll find that that's it's not only is that the message, it's a relevant message to us even today. Certainly. Why should we study the book of Revelation? So when you study the Gospels, if you don't believe that Jesus was resurrected from the dead, well, I'm not mad at you, but you're just not a Christian, right? In other words, that's one of the key things. If Jesus wasn't resurrected from the dead, then you don't believe one of the major tenets of Christianity. You can't really say that about the book of Revelation, right? There's not really anything in the book of Revelation that if you don't believe this thing, then you're not a Christian. It just doesn't work that way because I don't think anybody's that confident. Well, there are some people who are confident, but those people generally don't know what they're talking about. Most people who really study the book of Revelation and they know a lot about it are not confident. Even John Calvin, he wrote a commentary on every book in the New Testament, and except for the book of Revelation, because he said it was just too far out. He didn't understand it, and so he would just leave it and focus his study on other books. And so, that tells you a lot. When you get people that are overly confident and they say, well, it's just an easy book to understand, well, those people definitely don't know what they're talking about, because it's definitely not easy. So why should we study the book of Revelation? Well, it is God's word, right? If you believe that Bible that you have in your hand or on your phone or however you have a Bible, if you believe that that's the word of God, and you believe that all God's word is there for you to learn and to give you revelation from God, revelation of Christ and revelation of salvation and things like that, then certainly you want to read it and you want to study it and you want to know what's in that, in the Bible. And the book of Revelation, as strange as it is, and it's very strange, it's there in the Bible, and so it's there for a reason. And so we should want to be able to interpret it as best we can. And again, if interpreted correctly, it offers hope and motivation to persevere even under the worst persecution. And it has, offered that hope to people throughout the centuries. Wendy actually gave me a kind of an analogy. It's kind of like eating or food, right? I like to eat. This is not COVID weight. This is cookie dough weight, right? It's hamburger weight. I like to eat. And I like it a lot to where I like to cook, right? So I don't just like to eat, but I like to cook. And so I like eating enough to where I go out of my way to find recipes and things to where I can cook. And so I've taken that step, forward. I've gone from just eating what people have cooked for me to where I actually like to, cook. Well, then other people go further than that, and they go and they look at, how food goes together and how you can take different things and, make stuff work together and how this is going to taste with this. And I don't know all those things, right? But some people will take it a step further. And so, you can always delve deeper, and different people will take it to different levels. You've got people that they love to cook so much that they'll go study in France, and so they learn French, and then they do all this stuff or whatever. Well, obviously, I'm not going to do that as much as I do love to eat. But you have different people that will take it to different levels. And so it's good to study the Bible. It's good to study the book of Revelation because it tells you something. And you can always go deeper if you choose. So it's not that people that eat are bad and they don't want to cook or they don't want to, go to school for cooking. But, you have your different levels and different people will do different things. It's not good or bad, but you have that opportunity. How should we study the book of Revelation, right? Note that John Walton is a Bible scholar, and he says, when he speaks about any book, just for the record, the Bible, although the Bible was written for us, it was not written to us, right? It was written to people who lived 2,000 years ago or even 3,000 years ago. And so we need to look at it the way they understood it first. It's not until we look at it the way the first audience saw it that we can then apply it to our current day. Ben Witherington says it this way. He says a text without a context is just a pretext for whatever you want it to mean, right? So if you just take a book and you provide it with no original historical context or anything else, then you can go through there and you can say, well, this just means whatever, I say it means. And that's the way cults get started, right? So, people have all kinds of interpretations of the Bible in general, and we have several different, religions that come out of that. And so part of that is the problem of interpretation and interpreting the Bible itself, in general. It's not just the book of Revelation. You should, if you've seen me teach up here, it's always about context. Everything in the Bible should be interpreted in its original context so that we can then apply it to our current day. All right, so who was the original audience, right? So if we want to interpret it like the original audience, well, who was that original audience? Well, the book of Revelation tells you. It says right there in Revelation 1:3, it says, "Blessed is the one who reads aloud the words of this prophecy, and blessed are those who hear and who keep what is written in it, for the time is near." So note, and we'll get more into this when we get to chapter 1, but so in the ancient world, most people couldn't read. And so what you would have is as the book of Revelation, which was a circular letter, the way they received it, they would get the book of Revelation. One person who could read would get up and read it to the congregation, and then everyone else would hear it. So that's why it says, blessed are those who read the words of this prophecy, and blessed are those who hear it, because that's the way it worked. And then it says at 1:4, John to the 7 churches that are in Asia, grace to you and peace from him who is and who was and who is to come, and from the 7 spirits who are before his throne. And so it specifically states that the book of Revelation is written to those 7 churches. And we will circle back around. The new press secretary, she says that all the time. I didn't think about that until I said it, but it made me think of her. Sorry. That's the way my brain works. I'm just like, oh, squirrel. All right. So how have people interpreted the book of Revelation through the last, couple of thousand years? Oh, wait, I'm sorry. So here's your picture. I can't see it back there. But so look, and I've got another picture in here of the same thing, and we'll just go over it now. We might as well. So look, you've got all the churches right here. You've got Patmos, and then you've got Ephesus, Smyrna, and then you go up to Pergamum, and you come down this way, right, till you get to Laodicea. Each one of these places is about 35 miles apart. And so it would take about a couple of days' journey to each one. And so what would happen is John writes the book, and it says again that it's to all these churches. And so he would then send it to Ephesus, which is the first church that's there, right? And then they would probably copy it at that point, and then the person who had the book would take it to the next place. It would be read, they would probably copy it, and then they would take it. And so it's a circular letter. It follows this logical sequence. It's literally meant to go to these 7 churches, right? Okay, so how has the book been interpreted? I promise we're not going to go deep into all this stuff. It's not going to be that bad. But there are 4 basic views and then one which is probably a little more logical. So first of all, we have the Preterist View. So Preterists believe that the book of Revelation was written to John's original audience, and that all of the events in the book, everything in the book, was fulfilled. In the most extreme example of Preterist View is that it was all fulfilled in 70 AD when the temple was destroyed. So they'll even say, and I don't get too much into their, the deal, but they'll say that Jesus actually returned in 70 AD, destroyed the temple. In other words, he was involved in that, Romans destroying the temple. And so they'll say, well, that's what it's all about. It's about Jesus' return is actually about him destroying the temple and blah, 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 and all that. Well, that's not what the book says, right? Certainly when you get through chapters 19 through 22, it clearly is talking about a future return of Jesus, right? A second coming, a true second coming, not, coming and through the destruction of Rome in 70 AD. Also, you get the arrival of the holy city in the latter chapters there. And even though that is all symbolic, just for the record, we're not talking about a literal, rebuilding of Jerusalem or something like that. It's all symbolic. It's about heaven and earth coming together, the new heavens and the new earth, which we just sang about, the new heavens and the new earth coming together, and then that's our inheritance, right? And so that stuff is future. So the Preterist view, that's the one thing that they have a problem with. The Historicist view, basically what they do is they look at events that have happened, like we would say, Hitler and World War II or World War I or the Protestant Reformation, and they'll look at all these events in history, and they'll try to say, well, these events are what the book of Revelation is talking about. Well, the major problem with that is, as events change, like, let's say during the Civil War, you think, well, this is the end. And they did. They thought, this has got to be the end because this is terrible. Like nothing's ever happened like this where, we have our country and it's fighting, each other and everything. So this is going to be the end. Well, then when it wasn't the end, then, they had to change, right? So then the historicist view is constantly changing because we keep getting new historical events. The futurist view sees the events of the book of Revelation after chapter 3, so basically after the letters to the churches, as future, and in the most extreme view, they see all of that as future, right? And so, again, when we do that, then you completely dismiss the original audience, right? It had to have meant something to them. Otherwise, why would they have gotten the book of Revelation, if it didn't mean anything to them? It'd be like they'd get the book and they'd be like, well, this doesn't actually mean anything to us. We'll just keep this tucked away until, 2,000 years from now when when the United States comes about and, suddenly it means something. And that's kind of what some interpreters, kind of want to believe is that it's just about the future. That's not true either. The Idealist View basically argues that the book of Revelation, it teaches timeless, truths, and there are no historical reference. In other words, it's not about any historical realities. It's only about, these timeless truths. And so you can read the book of Revelation, and you get the timeless truths out of it. It's about persecution and all these different things. But you're not looking for anything in the future. You're not. There's nothing in the past that it's specifically about. And so again, it cuts out both sides. It cuts out the original audience. So it meant something to the original audience, right? And if you say that it didn't, then that's the problem. And then certainly, again, there are definitely future aspects of the book of Revelation, clearly, that haven't happened yet. And so if you believe that it's, that it actually means something, then you still look for those future aspects. Again, the second coming comes to mind. That would be a major judgment, those things. Okay, so that brings us to the Eclectic View. Basically, it puts all the views together. Or not puts them together, but it says that each view has positive points. So, for instance, again, the Preterist View, it takes seriously that the book was written to the original audience. And it says, okay, what did it mean to them? All right, that's a good thing. That's what we want. All right? Just for the record, the Historicist View, I hate to leave them out, but they don't offer anything. Because, again, they have to change constantly, so they're out. All right, the Futurist View, certainly, again, the book of Revelation has future elements to it, right? And so even though it's too much to say that everything after chapter 3 is future, well, again, some of it is clearly future. So they have that right. In the Idealist View, certainly the book teaches timeless truths that we can look at and we can say these mean things to all generations. For instance, the letters, even though the letters are written to those 7 churches, we certainly can learn from those, right? We certainly can take, their meaning and what it meant to the original audience, and then we can apply it to our modern time period, and we can certainly learn from that. And so that's why you would say the Eclectic View is generally, that's what we'll be discussing in here. But let me just say this: it doesn't matter which view you hold to. There's not a ton of stuff that's really gonna. We're going to talk about the interpretation of the things in the book of Revelation. It doesn't matter what your view is, those are the things that we're going to talk about. So, no matter your view, you'll still, those things will still make sense in most cases. All right, so when we talk about any book of the Bible, we have to talk about context. And listen, let me just say, the book of Revelation is not a simple book. Okay, the Bible is not a simple book. The Bible's complicated, right? Again, it's written to a time completely different than our time. We want to look at, people in the Bible like they live today, and when it talks about, their houses and stuff, we just want to imagine that their houses look like our houses, and, that they live like we did, and they all had indoor plumbing and all that. No, it was totally different, right? And so we have to look at their context. And that makes it complicated because you do have to delve into that context, and to do that, you have to read other things that aren't necessarily in the Bible, right? So, literary context. The first thing that you need to understand about literary context is you need to understand the genre of the book of Revelation. So, a genre simply means what type of literature is this, right? So, in the New Testament, for instance, you have Gospels, which are their own genre. Gospels are basically like they're basically ancient biographies, but they have some little differences. But we call those Gospels. That's an actual official genre. Then we have Acts, right? And Acts is ancient historiography. It's an ancient history. It's written as ancient history. And then what's the biggest genre that we have in the New Testament? Letters, right? Epistles, right? The epistle to, it's letters. Most of the books in the New Testament, when you have the, all of Paul's letters, of course, are letters. And then you have the, what they call the Catholic letters. It doesn't have anything to do with the Catholic Church. It's just the Catholic letters or the other letters other than Paul's letters. So the book of Revelation does stand on its own in the New Testament because it's an apocalyptic work, right? And in apocalyptic work, we have several apocalyptic works in Judaism, right? So Christianity, of course, comes out of Judaism, and so they use the same literary styles and such. And so apocalyptic is a specific genre. It comes from the word apocalypsis, and you know that word because it's where the word revelation comes from. Like we interpret the word apocalypsis as revelation, right? So the revelation is actually the apocalypse. That's why sometimes people will call it the apocalypse of John. It's because that's the Greek word that we translate as revelation. Now, it has a long, the Society of Biblical Literature has a long, complicated definition, and I have trickled that into these little points right here that we're going to talk about. And so I've made it as simple as possible because it's fairly complicated. All right, so first of all, it's revelatory literature, right? So it is revealed from God, and it is revealed, in this case, to John of Patmos. And so how do the gods reveal in the ancient world? So throughout the ancient world, you have prophets in all kinds of different religions, right? You have the Babylonians, and they have their prophets, and you have the Canaanites, they have their prophets and such. Usually, those prophets, the way they prophesy is they would cut animals open, they would read the entrails, or they would let birds loose, and the way the birds flew, that would tell them something, right? Well, the difference between those prophets and the prophets in Israel is the prophets in Israel were actually, prophesying the word of God, the one true God. And so generally the way they would get prophecies is through dreams, like Joseph, right? He has dreams in Genesis, and ecstatic, like John says that he was in the Spirit, and so he seems to. Again, it talks about him being taken up to heaven, but it's not a literal necessarily. It's not literal that he went to heaven. It's like Isaiah and Ezekiel and Daniel, where they see these in visions, right? So they're taken up to heaven in visions. Apocalyptic literature has a narrative framework. Okay, so basically it's a story. It's told as a story. It is mediated by otherworldly. Okay, so I guess I just cut out words because it was going to run off the thing. But it's mediated by an otherworldly being to a human recipient. So again, it's an angel, right? So in Daniel, you have an angel who explains to Daniel. And the same thing in the book of Revelation. You have the angel who explains to John what he's seeing. So right there at the beginning, when you see the lampstands and the stars and all that stuff, and you're thinking, what is this? And John's thinking, what is this? And then it says, hey, this is what this means, right? And he explains right there. So then you know, and you're like, oh, well, that makes sense. Not really. All right. The book of Revelation, or apocalyptic literature, concerns past, present, and future events. Okay, so it's just one of its defining characteristics. And it connects the divine realm with the earthly realm. So the perfect example of that is, even though it's symbolic, the way it's written out, it points clearly to literal things that happen. So you've got in chapter 12, and again, we'll do it when we get there, but you've got chapter 12, you got the woman clothed with the sun, with the moon and the stars. Well, she's clearly Israel. And then Israel has the Messiah, and I'll tell you why it's clearly when we get to it. But and she has the Messiah, so you have all of this symbolic language, but it's about the earthly things that happened, right? But then you get to, I think it's verse 8 in chapter 12, and then suddenly you get the same story, but it's told from a heavenly perspective, where you have Michael and his angels fighting against Satan, and Satan is thrown down to the earth, right? So you have two of the same basic events, but they're told from two perspectives. One is on the earthly realm, and the other is in the divine realm. It's the same thing Paul talks about when he talks about powers and principalities. He sees that we are all here right now, but then there's a spiritual world too that we can't see, that's right here with us, and all the things that happen have counterparts on both sides. If you've ever watched the show Stranger Things, you have the upside down in the Stranger Things. It's the same thing. It's two worlds that coincide together, but you generally just don't go back and forth between them. And so that's the way Paul sees it, and that's the way apocalyptic literature sees it. And again, all of the stuff, as we go through the book, we will talk about this more as we go through. Apocalyptic literature provides hope and comfort to those living under an oppressive empire. Okay, so Daniel is the primary example of apocalyptic literature in the Old Testament, right? So you get to the second half of Daniel, and you get what we call the apocalyptic section of Daniel. And you get other aspects of Daniel where you have beasts, and the beasts represent empires, and you have all these different things. Well, those are all apocalyptic images, right? And so that is the example in Jewish literature. And so then you go after that, and you have several other apocalyptic pieces of literature that aren't in the Bible, of course, but we have other examples, and we'll talk about that in a little while. But it starts out under oppressive empires. So, for instance, again, for Daniel, it was when he was exiled in Babylon, and the Israelites were exiled in Babylon, and they felt like, you know what? God doesn't seem very powerful, right? I'm in a bad way, and here we are in Babylon. We're being forced to worship these other gods, and our God's not doing anything about it. And so, are we lost? Like, is God just not powerful, or has God forsaken us forever? Or is He not going to help us ever again? And so apocalyptic literature says, no, that's not the case. God is still in control, and in the end, He's definitely going to, vaporize evil. But that's the message of hope, right? But just for the record, that message of hope does not mean that your life here on earth is necessarily going to get better, because that's pretty much what apocalyptic literature says. Is it says, hey, things are really bad for you here, but it's not this life that you should be worried about. It's the afterlife, and that's what and I don't want to say working toward, like you have to work for your salvation or anything, but in other words, that's the point, and that's the same thing that the book of Revelation is saying. It's saying, look, here you are, original audience, under this Roman Empire, and it seems all-powerful, and it seems like it can give you peace if you'll just give in and worship the emperor and worship the pagan gods and do all these things, and again, we'll talk about all that. But don't do that, because they can't offer you the peace that you really want, and that is eternal peace through salvation and Jesus, through Jesus Christ. And so that, again, that's kind of the point. Okay, we have in apocalyptic literature, we have symbolic imagery. Ben Witherington calls it insider literature, right? You have to be an insider to understand what it means. And what does it mean to be an insider? Well, for apocalyptic literature, you need to be Jewish, or at least understand the way Jewish people understood, because that's who it was written to. It was written to Christians, of course, who were coming out of a Jewish background, and then Gentile Christians, but they certainly would have been familiar. They're familiar with the Old Testament and other Jewish literature at the time, because that would have just been something, they didn't have Netflix, so they sat around and, studied the Bible, which for them would have been the Old Testament. It is referential, but not literal, right? So when I look, at Daniel, okay? So Daniel, you have these symbolic beasts, right? Well, they're not beasts. There's not really beasts, right? They're not dragons coming out of the oceans or whatever. But that doesn't mean they don't actually point to a literal thing. They point to literal empires, right? And so that's what it means by referential but not literal. You have these symbols, and those symbols aren't literal, but they point to literal things, right? And so that's the key, is you have to interpret, how this, what this means before you can see what the literal thing is that it's pointing to, the referent of those things. I think it was a scholar named Craig Kester, and he said it this way. He says the images in the book of Revelation are as though the author just takes a whole stack of pictures and just throws them in your face all at one time, right? Because that's the way the images hit you as you read the book of Revelation. That's the point, is you're supposed to see the images, and they're supposed to get a reaction from you. And the reaction is, I want to worship God. I don't want to worship the empire or whatever pagan, situation is, whatever empire is over us at the time. So here's an example, right? And I just picked this. I look for all kinds of images that would not be so political that they would be offensive, and I looked everywhere. And so but I didn't want them to say anything. So this is why I found this one. Was one of them, right? So look, let's say that you don't understand football. You don't know anything about football. You've never heard of football. You've never seen football. You certainly never heard of Alabama or Auburn, okay? And you see this. Do you have any idea what's going on? No. No, because you're not an insider. You don't understand what any of this means, right? But if you know about football, and you particularly know about Alabama and Auburn, then you look up here and you say, oh yeah, he's wearing red, it's an elephant, he's got a football, that's Alabama. That's Auburn, because he's a tiger. And then apparently Alabama has beaten Auburn. Is that complicated? Because you understood the reference, right? You understood all the aspects needed to get it. And it doesn't say anything. There's no words on this picture, right? But you understood exactly what it meant. I don't care for football, so I'm not against Auburn or anything. Besides, y'all got a new coach, so maybe y'all get better. All right. Just kidding. I did. I'm sorry. I was just kidding. I really don't care about football. I just thought because I'm in Alabama, I had to make some, shot about football. It makes me seem more manly. All right. So what about this, right? Now, this does say dim, and I hate that. I was going to take it out, but then that would have been, you can't do that for a picture, somebody's picture or whatever. So look, let's say that you don't know anything about politics, okay? And you see this. And these, there's some, that's a donkey and that's an elephant, but they have fingers out of their, and all these fingers, what? Right? But I doubt that there's any person in this room who doesn't understand what this means, right? You know that these are Democrats and these are Republicans and they're pointing their fingers at each other, blaming each other. And when you see that, you think about all the, rigmarole and the turmoil that's in our government, and you have all of these things that come out in your mind just from seeing this picture, right? Same thing with the book of Revelation, right? That's what those pictures would have done exactly the same thing for those people in that day. They knew exactly what all those pictures meant, and just like you know what this picture means, right? Imagine if you just came up 2,000 years from now, and let's say that, God forbid, but the United States was gone and there was no sports anymore, and somebody saw that other picture, and then they certainly don't know about Democrats or Republicans because all that's gone, and they look at this picture and they're like, I don't know what this means, right? So here's one last one. Here again, we know, and it's even got their colors, right? You have to know that, elephants are obviously Republicans, and then their color is red, and you have Democrats, and they're donkeys, and they have, blue or whatever. And then you got the USA, right? We know what the USA is, but I hate that, again, that they put that in there. But just because, again, I like it better when it's just an image. Because if that didn't say USA, would you have known what it was talking about? Yeah, you'd have gotten it, right? So they're pulling us from both sides, but we're not getting anywhere. We're just sitting still, right? That makes sense, right? Nobody has any hard time understanding. Again, Book of Revelation is the same thing. Richard Bauckham calls the images in Revelation Christian prophetic counter images, right? So you have the empire that's there all the time. Think about for us, and I'm not saying that our government is bad or whatever. I mean, it's pretty bad, but not like Rome, okay? We watch the news all the time, and we see these images of all this stupid stuff, people arguing, and then, my gosh, we had the Capitol was stormed and all that stuff. I mean, that's bad images that we see, right? We see a president, regardless of your political party, they're on the news and they're signing this legislation or not legislation, but they are basically. They're signing whatever executive orders and stuff, and so you see that all the time. Well, what the Book of Revelation does is it presents counter images to go against that. And so, of course, in the book of Revelation, we're talking about Rome. And so, the book of Revelation presents counter images so you don't look at Rome and think, hey, Rome is not as great as you think it is. It's not as powerful. It's not as intimidating. Look at God's throne room, right? Look at Jesus, the King of Kings. That's, again, the point of the book of Revelation. All right, sources of Revelation's imagery. You have Jewish biblical sources, and that's what it is, what it says it is. It's Jewish biblical sources. You have Jewish extra-biblical sources, and then you have Greco-Roman sources, right? And the book of Revelation takes all of these in and uses them. So we'll go quickly through some examples. Look, the Jewish biblical examples are going to be from they use tons of biblical imagery, but the book of Revelation uses a lot of I don't want to call them citations because it doesn't cite it. When you read Matthew, for instance, and it says, it is written blah, blah, blah. And you know when it says it is written that, that's probably from the Old Testament. The book of Revelation never does that. It just uses the information without citing it at all. And so that information usually comes from Daniel, Ezekiel, or Zechariah. So you have to be familiar with those books in order to understand the imagery. Jewish extra-biblical literature. I'm just going to give you one example. First Enoch is one of our most influential, other than Daniel and the book of Revelation. It's one of the most influential apocalyptic works. It has a large apocalyptic section in it. And a lot of people always will give pushback, and they'll say, well, I don't think that we need to be, interpreting biblical books with extra biblical, literature, right? And so, but Jude would disagree with you, because Jude says, it was also about these that Enoch, the seventh from Adam, prophesied, saying, behold, the Lord comes with 10,000s of his holy ones to execute judgment on all and to convict all the ungodly of all their deeds of ungodliness that they have committed in such an ungodly way. There's lots of ungodliness in that statement. And of all the harsh things that ungodly sinners have spoken against him. They're very ungodly, very ungodly. All right, so it says it's from Enoch, right? And if only we had the book of Enoch, we could know, oh, wait, we do have the book of Enoch, right? And look, in the book of Enoch, at 1 Enoch 1:9, it says, look, he comes with the myriads of his holy ones to execute judgment on all and to destroy all the wicked and to convict all the humanity of all the wicked deeds and they have done and the proud and hard words that wicked sinners, so this translator obviously liked the word wicked more, spoke against him, okay? So look, the book of Jude quotes directly from 1 Enoch. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean that our Bibles are wrong and that we should put the book of Enoch in our Bibles? No, that's not what it means. It means that biblical writers had a large plethora of literature that people were familiar with. And so they used that literature. Just like if I were to stand up here and talk about Star Wars, right, and use it somehow to illustrate something. I used Alabama and Auburn, right, and Democrats and Republicans. Does that mean that we should have Alabama and Auburn in the Bible? Be very careful how you answer that question. Be very careful, right? Some people would say, yes, it should be. All right? No, they use literature of their day to make points. We do that all the time, and we don't get broken up over it. It provides us with much needed context. Greco-Roman literature, I'm not going to give one of the big examples that's in the book of Revelation because I'll do that then. But you can get an example from Paul. I'm going to read through it very quickly because it's a larger section that I wanted you to have the context. So Paul, standing in the midst of the Areopagus, said, men of Athens, I perceive that in every way you are very religious. For as I passed along and observed the objects of your worship, I found also an altar with this inscription, to the unknown God. What therefore you worship as unknown, this I proclaim to you. So they have a altar to the unknown God, and he is basically it's what we call teaching them where they're at in education. So they worship this unknown God, and he's going to say, look, the unknown God is the one true God of Israel, or, well, all time at this point, right? Of all, Gentiles included, but it's the one true God, right? And so he's going to make that connection for them. The God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by man, nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mankind life and breath and everything. And he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods, blah, blah, blah. So again, he's using that to connect to God, the God of Yahweh, let's say Yahweh, that they should seek God and perhaps feel their way, blah, blah, blah. And then he says, for in him we live and move and have our being, as even some of your own poets have. And so that right there, that quote at the very beginning, in him we live and move, remember that, said, for we are indeed his offspring. And I'll mispronounce it if I don't see it. So that first part there is from Epimenides, which is a Greek philosopher. And then the second half of it is from this guy named Aratus, right? He's also a Greek writer. And so again, Paul uses their own literature to connect the points that need to be made. And so if you're not familiar, and just for the record, we don't have those originals. We only have quotes from them, but it's quotes that clearly are the same that he quotes from. And so we know, and he says it. He says your own poets have said. Blah, blah, blah. And so that's it. That's the point of that, is that you need to know. All right, genre, letter. So not only is the book of Revelation an apocalypse, but it's also a letter. So then you ask yourself, well, okay, well, it's letters, but are those letters literal or figurative? Well, again, like I said, they're written in order of a circular letter. They go from each, from Patmos to the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, and around. And note that they include specific details pertaining to those specific cities in that specific time. So that tells you that it was written to those people, for those people to understand. They would have understood what it meant. All right, and then last, we're going to go through, all right, we're going to attempt historical context, which is not a lot, but we'll go through it quickly. Okay, the book of Revelation is saying this. Who will you worship? All right, are you going to worship the empire who promises peace? Note the Pax Romana, right? The Roman peace is what they offered to all people if they would just let them conquer them. To all citizens, an earthly comfort if one only submits. The one who rules by violence and death, right? Or are you going to worship God, who is the Lord of all and who brings salvation and everlasting life through His Son, the King of Kings, the one who has already won against the powers of evil through His personal sacrifice, not through violence and death, but through His personal sacrifice. The book of Revelation is written under Domitian, who was the emperor from 81 to 96. He demanded worship, and he demanded the titles Lord and God. The Gospel of John is written in the same time period as the book of Revelation, and note that you have Thomas who calls Jesus my Lord and my God. Well, that would have been a slap in the face to Domitian because he is my Lord and my God, as far as he's concerned. You have temples established at Ephesus and Smyrna, right? Which, did I put Smyrna? I did. No, that's Smyrna. Yeah, that's right. Sorry, I can't see. Ephesus and Smyrna, which are two of the churches that get in trouble in the book of Revelation. Jews were exempt. Jews did not have to worship the emperor because they were an officially sanctioned religion. Christians were considered atheists because they refused to worship the emperor and the pagan gods. And they considered themselves Jewish because they were just an extension of Judaism because they recognized the Messiah. But the Jews, the synagogue of Satan, said, no, these people, no, this is a different religion. And that put Christians out for persecution. After 100, the year 100, the usual charge against Christians was refusal to worship the emperor. So when we see charges after 100, those charges involve not worshiping the emperor. Nero also demanded worship, but he is earlier. He was from 54 to 68. He demanded worship as a god, and he blamed Christians for a fire that many blamed him for that went through Rome. And this sparked widespread persecution. He basically scapegoated Christians because people didn't like Christians anyway. People were blaming him for the fire, and so therefore he said, you know what? I think it was the Christians that did it, right? Nero committed suicide in 68. That's not 1968, that's just 68. But Romans, Jews, and Christians expected him to return. And again, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but basically he stabbed himself in the throat, no less, which had to be a terrible way to die. And he stabbed himself in the throat, and some of his followers took him and buried him, and nobody saw his body. And he had been so horrible to all people that they did not believe he was dead. And there's a group of people called Parthians, which are now in Iran, what we would call Iran or Persia back then. The Parthians, they thought that he went to live with the Parthians, and that he would come back with the Parthians. That's important later. So the book is written under Domitian in the face of religious and financial persecution for non-participation in the emperor cult. However, Nero in the book represents the extent to which persecution can lead. So it's written under Domitian. Things are not horrible, but they're pretty bad. And the point of the book, or much of the point of the book, is look, if you let this get out of hand and you worship the emperor, well, eventually it could get to the point to where it was like Nero, right? Because Nero burned, I had a long thing I was going to read, I won't read it. But Nero would actually burn Christians in his garden. He would have them attacked and eaten by wild animals and stuff. And important to early Christians was that Paul was beheaded under Nero and Peter was crucified, traditionally upside down. And last thing, all right, this is the meaning of the book of Revelation. All right, so if you said, hey, what does the book of Revelation mean? It means this. Although things seem bad now, and it appears that the empire can provide you with security if you will only give up your Christian identity, God is still in control, and it is only He who can provide you with security which is eternal. So you must persevere through persecution here so that you can gain ultimate security which comes from continued faith in Christ, who has already defeated evil and who will return to judge and destroy evil permanently. If you ask what the meaning of the book of Revelation is, it's that, right? And then again, it will be fleshed out as we go through the book, and you'll see it. I mean, it will make sense as we go through. Thanks for watching, and please feel free to leave a comment or question. And if you found this video helpful, hit like. And if you would like to be notified when new videos are released, hit subscribe and join us next time as we study the Bible in context.